Hello, and a very warm welcome to episode 293 of the Total Saints podcast, your home for all things Southampton Football Club. A huge thank you to our TSP Patreon community, because we couldn't make the show each week without your loyal support. Coming up this week on the podcast, deep breath, a 98th minute winner for Leicester at St Mary's leaves Saints still in search of that first win. But who was to blame for the disastrous second half? There are quite a few candidates. We'll try and get to the bottom of it. And it's a trip to Manchester City next. You've got to laugh, haven't you? My name is Martin Starke, and I'm joined on this episode by Steve Grant, who is the owner of Saints Web. Glen Cour is writer of the blog League One -10. And George Rees-Julian is Southampton reporter for the Daily Echo. So let's get into it, shall we? Unbelievable, disappointing, predictable, speechless, all words used to describe that Leicester result. That's just the ones I can mention on the podcast. 2-0 up, cruising at half-time. Of course, Saints would contrive to lose the game 3-2 in the 98th minute. We've got Anthony Taylor to talk about. We've got questionable substitutions. We've got Russell Martin. We've got the mystery player who wasn't doing his job. There is so much to discuss. Steve, I kind of want to start with the positives. It was a decent first half, right? You can't ask for much more than being 2-0 up at halftime.
It was a reasonable first hour, I thought. The last 10 minutes of the first half, we were kind of hanging on a little bit. They basically fashioned only one chance from that, the one where they hit the post. But other than that, they had a lot of ball around the area where they frankly didn't do anything with it, and we were kind of okay. But yeah, apart from that, we were really good, despite having to play against a frankly ludicrous refereeing performance, whereby anytime we dared to even breathe on a Leicester player, it was a yellow card, and yet they can chop Matías Fernandez in half. And oh no, carry on, lads, it's all good. So yeah, up against that sort of early injustice really that we were feeling, because I think we'd already had 2 bookings by the time we went 1-0 up, and it was just frankly ludicrous. But yeah, we attacked. That must have been a plan for us to bombard James Justin at right back, because both Manning and Kyle Walker-Peters had a lot of joy against him in the first half. Both of them got assists just from getting in behind him and creating themselves a little bit of space. Simple cutbacks for simple finishes for both Archer and Aribo. And you think at 2-0 up, great. We're finally going to get off the mark. We've possibly even we're looking good to sort of finally break that sort of little Leicester hoodoo that we've had for a while. But yeah, second half, the injury to Sugawara basically kind of preempted a collapse of epic proportions, which was partially self-inflicted, partially Leicester bringing on better players than they had starting as subs. Steve Cooper got their starting lineup completely wrong. And Fatawu came on and basically destroyed us, just like he did up at their place at the back end of last season. Couple that with our substitutions, which, you look back at them in the cold light of the day and you just think, what? It was just a whole load of absolute nonsense, really. The only one that really sort of had any positive impact was Onuachu coming on. Archer had kind of run his race by then. He'd played quite well, I thought. Onuachu came on, offered something a little bit different. He held the ball up really well, which did allow us to progress up the pitch, sort of 15, 20 yards, give ourselves a little bit of a breather from them sort of bombing down our flanks after we'd made the changes. But yeah, it's just those last 20 minutes or so where you're hanging on. Once it gets back to 2-2, actually, I thought we'd managed most of that period quite well. I don't think Leicester had a proper chance up until they got that 98th minute corner. And Russell Martin's come out and said that one person hasn't done their job. I don't know whether he's talking to an individual who should be placed more or less where the ball ends up. Or whether somebody sort of in a senior position elsewhere should have been telling somebody to be in that position. But either way, someone's got to be. I mean, you only have to be around the penalty area, just around the penalty spot, just in the vague area of it. And all of a sudden, that low cutback isn't an option because it's just an easy cutout if assuming the player is kind of switched on. Which, I mean, with us, you can never quite rely on. But yeah, it's just infuriating that while in many ways we are learning some lessons, there are also some complete fundamentals that we are failing to grasp. And I mean, we've played both Ipswich and Leicester at home. Both of them for 75 minutes of the game have been terrible, and we've been very comfortable against them. And yet we've allowed them to score goals from basically the same place in our penalty area from a corner and with the last kick of the game. And I don't know how you can do that two home games running. It's mental. And it's those sort of unlearned lessons that will cost Russell Martin his job eventually, whether that's this week. Personally, I doubt that'll happen, but there's rumors in the papers for a reason, and those rumors don't tend to get there by accident. It's not usually. Papers are known to kind of embellish things a little bit, but they don't tend to like just make things up out of thin air. They're fed this information from somewhere, so there's got to be some element of truth in it that he's under a little bit of pressure from above now. And those sort of things, allied with the substitutions, they don't help. And the reaction at full time from the fan base was kind of what you would expect in that situation. It was, you've got a lot of people now who have fallen on a different side of the fence. If you'd asked them 2 weeks ago, well, actually, no, if you'd asked them pre-Bournemouth, a lot of people would have still been very much in a, no, Russell Martin's okay. He's got us up. He deserves a bit of time to kind of learn these lessons kind of effectively on the job. But having had, obviously, the Ipswich game, the Bournemouth non-performance, and now the last 25 minutes yesterday, I think you'll have found a lot of people sort of who were maybe floating towards keeping him have probably taken a little bit of a hop over the fence and maybe take a little bit of a different view now.
We will definitely explore this because I think you've got your Russell Martin ins, you've got your Russell Martin outs, and people will have an opinion on that. And then there are people like me that just want to see their football club win a game, and it ain't happening at the moment. So there's an argument and a discussion to be had around that. Something's got to change. We'll try and get to the bottom of what that might be. Glenn, you're waiting very patiently to have your say. Do you want to start with Anthony Taylor? Because Steve mentioned the foul on Fernandes. I'd forgotten about that one, to be honest. There was the challenge on Dibbling. I'm sure one of their players got some treatment and didn't go off for 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's right.
Missed that. There was the foul on an Achu, of course, which even they were talking about on Match of the Day last night. It was that there are countless things. He's not the sole reason we lost that game, but I feel like we need to address that before we can move on and get off our chests.
I mean, to be honest, I'll talk about it because you've asked me to talk about it, but we can't control what the referee does. The referee does what he does. Whether you think it's a conspiracy, whether you think he's bent, whether you think he's just rubbish, at the end of the day, we can't control the referee's performance. We certainly can't control what VAR does. We can only control what we do, and by what we do, I mean the manager and his substitutions and the way that we manage the game and the way we don't pick up players on the edge of the box and all that stuff. That's the stuff that we could control. But as I said, you've asked me about Anthony Taylor, so we'll talk about it. Basically, we should have won that game anyway, regardless of what Anthony Taylor did. But I remember thinking at half-time that he was atrocious in the first half. Just the uneven way he handled things. The foul on Tyler Dibbling on the edge of the box was the clearest foul you've ever seen, and he didn't give that. He allowed Wout Faes to basically crash through the back of Archer on at least one occasion. I mean, that's an automatic yellow card, but he didn't see fit to even give that as a free kick. So he didn't seem to know what was a foul and what wasn't. Whether it was I didn't particularly think he was not favouring us in the first half. I just thought he was terrible both ways. I mean, after the Dibbling incident, the ball broke to Leicester. They attacked, and there was a definite foul with us to win the ball back. But it was almost like I didn't give that one up there, so I'm not going to give this one. It's like he was making up for something. So I thought he was terrible in the first half, and he was really the only thing I had to complain about at half time. But in the second half, when you look at the incident with Onuachu, it's an interesting one because it's the Championship and the Premier League. If you think if that game was in the Championship yesterday, neither penalty would have been given. You know, and no one would have come away feeling like anything was dodgy because everyone would have gone, okay, honest mistake, whatever, and we would have just got on with it. You know, we would have got away with that almighty scramble after Ramsdale's save. Fraser wouldn't have been sent off, and it would have just been play on. And the Onuachu one wouldn't have been given either, and therefore both, you know, it would have been quite even. You know, we'd have come away with no problem because it's the Premier League. You expect them to get the decision right because you've got VAR. So for VAR not to give the Onuachu one and to give the Fraser one is completely imbalanced. I mean, for even match of the day, you notoriously don't give a rat's about clubs near the bottom. For them to actually pick up on that and mention it, there seems to be this new thing creeping into the lexicon now, which is about that action had no consequence or something, which is just rubbish. It like gives referees almost like a get out of jail card, and it makes people think, hang on, there's more to this. I mean, we had one against Arsenal a couple of weeks ago where Marino could have been given offside for the second goal, but they said what he did didn't have enough consequence. Apparently, the guy hanging onto Onuachu's shirt for 5 seconds didn't have enough consequence. And obviously, I'm not arguing with the Fraser one. You know, that's what VAR's for when used correctly. I mean, the other funny thing is I don't think Onuachu actually realised that the guy was holding his shirt.
Probably not. No.
if he had done, then it would have been different. But yeah, I mean, I got no issue with the time being, you know, the fact that they scored after the 97th minute. Was it supposed to be 7?
Well, it's a minimum of 7, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a minimum of 7. And I think people forget that. They expect the whistle to go spot on the time. So I don't have an issue with that. But yeah, I mean, Anthony Taylor, I thought was terrible. He comes across as a very sort of arrogant referee. He's almost taken over from Mike Dean in that regard, in that he's never wrong no matter what. But as I said, we can't control what he does. We got to control what we do. We should have won that game. We should have seen out the second half, but we allowed Leicester to build up a head of steam, and then, you know, through things we could have prevented, just with better decisions from the sideline, we could have seen that game out quite comfortably.
George, what was your view on the game yesterday and where it all changed? I guess the subs is the next big talking point, isn't it? For Leicester, they changed the game. They made the team better, and ours seemed to make the team worse. It was a big talking point for everybody walking home yesterday.
Yeah, I think you can pinpoint really when Yuki Sugawara went off. Russell Martin did the same thing because he goes off 2 minutes later. They score and it's come down that left-hand side. Ryan Fraser's only just come on a few minutes before that. And I never really like subs where you're doing it and you're having to shuffle around a lot of players, because Kyle then went over to the right, albeit that was because they don't have a right-sided defender on the bench. They only had Charlie Taylor. And then Ryan Fraser's now in this role where he's kind of a defender, but he's a winger. And in some ways, I can see why Russell maybe brought him on, because it was Ryan Fraser who was going to start at Arsenal in this same dual role with Walker-Peters, but it then became Manning when Fraser was ill. So to sort of think why Russell Martin may have gone for Fraser is perhaps because he wanted someone who can attack down that side. But if you're 2-0 up in a Premier League game that you have to win, although Russell Martin doesn't like saying they're must-win games, but they have to win that game, you bring Charlie Taylor on, don't you? Someone who's going to give you that defensive support, someone who's going to help you see out a game, which is something they haven't done in the Premier League so far. And I think you then go and look at the other subs. They go and make Will Smallbone coming back from injury. I think had they seen the game out, no one's maybe going to question Smallbone coming on. But then the fact you got Adam Lallana sitting on the bench and he doesn't come on, I asked Russell about that, and he said that they didn't bring Lallana on because they were defending at that point in the game, and that is not Adam Lallana's game. Essentially,
Right.
he's there to be a
is that
It's not
creator.
small
is
bones
that,
either, is it?
is that small bone strength?
Yeah,
Is it?
exactly.
Midfield enforcer.
Exactly. So if you bring on Lallana when you bring on Smallbone, at that point you're not losing in the game. If I'm correct, I can't quite remember what the score was at that point. You're definitely not drawing the game. I mean, sorry.
2-1, I think.
It was
I think it was
2-1.
right. They hadn't scored that penalty yet. So if you bring Lallana on, someone who's got that experience, right? He's a leader on the pitch, and they haven't got Jack Stevens, another person who Russell's previously said that they need on the pitch, right? They need those leaders. You've got Flynn Downs, who's a new captain. You've got Taylor Howard-Bellis. They're the real leaders. If you chuck on a 36-year-old Adam Lallana to see out the game, then that's probably a better thing to do. And then Smallbone has supposedly tweaked his hamstring, so looks like he's probably going to be out again. So if he's come on, he's played the last 15 minutes with an injury, it's almost a bit of a disaster substitution, but it's not quite as bad as the Ryan Fraser one, because he was on the pitch for 9 minutes and then goes and gets sent off for something that he doesn't really need to do, does he?
Just the one thing on the Smallbone thing, he was limping before the last set of substitutions were made. So
they
would have known he was injured. So
I hadn't spotted that. That's really interesting.
The last two substitutions should have been Smallbone and Manning off. But he took Dibbling off and put Sula Waste of Space on. And, you know, I mean, I can't have been alone in thinking when Fatawu came on, was he destroyed us up at Leicester.
Yeah.
And who was he playing against that day? Ryan Manning. So not only did he weaken the left midfield from a defensive position point of view by, you know, so you had Fraser instead of where Manning was, you then weakened left back. Ryan Manning is nowhere near good enough to be a left back in the Premier League. Absolutely nowhere near. And Fatawu must have thought, oh, it was absolutely his birthday. And he played massive parts in the first goal, the second goal. And it was just so predictable. I mean, yeah, we talk a lot about, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, but no, that wasn't hindsight. That was always going to happen. And it was an absolutely ridiculous change to make at that time when you've got Charlie Taylor, who is a perfectly serviceable Premier League level left back waiting to come on. And don't get me started on Smallbone. He didn't start. I don't think he touched the ball. I don't think he touched the ball. I should have looked it up. 25 minutes. If he touched it more than 3 times, I'll be amazed. And I know he was injured, which takes a bit of the edge off it. But he should have been taken off. It was just it was just ridiculous. And that's what I mean about things that we can prevent. And as far as I'm concerned, Russell Martin had an absolute beast at Bournemouth, which is what Steve alluded to there, and he's had another one yesterday. And that's the problem. If you can point your finger at the manager I mean, it's amazing. Usually when something happens and you've got an opinion on something, you might be in the minority to have that opinion. But you look at the general rule of thumb on Twitter after the game, and honestly, there was 90% of people were saying, "What on earth was that substitution?"
Yeah.
And when you do things that on the face of it seem quite mad, and something like that happens, you basically throw away a 2-goal lead and lose the game. It isn't going well. That's not a good day. And he kind of tried to gloss it over a little bit in the press conference. He said, you know, we had to make a change at 2-1. No, it wasn't at 2-1. It was at 2-0. The Fraser
should have got to
substitution
2-1, should it? Yeah, it didn't need to get to 2-1.
And he said,
have we seen a replay of the foul by Vardy, by the way?
Yeah,
because I'm sure that was I'm sure that was pretty naughty. I mean, similar to what obviously he landed one on Van Dijk, didn't he, years ago, which basically cost us winning a cup.
Yeah.
And now he's done that, and he got booked for it. I think
he did get a yellow, but he's seen him there, hasn't he? He's just gone, I'm having him.
Yeah, ridiculous.
And gets away with it. Steve, I just want to get your opinion on Lallana before we kind of move on and chat about a couple of other bits, because you've got Flynn Downs, Joe Aribo, obviously Fernandes doing well enough to keep him out of the starting lineup. But as George was saying, he's kind of brought in as that experienced head. When are we going to see him play? If he can't come on to help you protect a lead and organise and show everybody where they need to be, then what's he doing here?
Well, yeah, I mean, the amount that Russell Martin has waxed lyrical about his on-field communication and things like that. And we've seen it in action as well. The games that he's played where he's been involved, we've looked a much better team with him on that pitch. So first half away at Everton, last 25 minutes or so at Cardiff. First out 50 minutes or so was it against Ipswich he started, and we've not seen him since, I don't think.
Yeah.
It's like, well, why is he, if he's not fit to play, why is he on the bench? Because you could fill that space with someone who can come on and maybe make an impact. Because I mean, we've got a big enough squad. But if he is fit, then why are we not using him? Because you can clearly see that he's got that leadership. He's constantly talking. He's a player that under pressure can retain possession, which was basically the main problem for us in that frantic sort of middle 20 minutes of that second half yesterday, was that we couldn't string two passes together. Leicester were on our tails and pressing us really sharply for a relatively short period of time, but it just got us completely flustered. And all of a sudden, we were giving the ball back to them and just letting them have another wave of attacks at us. And Lallana would have at least made an attempt. I mean, not necessarily would have been successful, but you'd have had a lot more confidence in his ability to retain possession in the centre circle, in those sort of tight, congested areas, and bring other people into play. It was only when Onwuachu came on that all of a sudden we had a presence and someone was able to put their foot on the ball and kind of have enough strength to hold people off. And yeah, it's just nuts that we're not seemingly willing to use him in any way. It's mad.
Let's just talk about the manager for a bit then, Glenn. It seems to me like he's kind of in self-preservation mode. You know, he came out last night, he said one person had a job to do to stop their goal. They didn't do it. We're not sure if that's an individual or whether that's sort of a team collectively. He didn't really say who. He's obviously keen to stick to his principles, which I guess we'll see him and his colleagues get another job somewhere else. But I fear it would be too late for us. He seems like he was saying about having a brilliant chat with the owners as well, and he wasn't worried about his job. He wasn't feeling under pressure. I kind of feel like he's now just looking after himself a bit.
Maybe. I do have a certain sympathy with managers when they get a microphone shoved in their face by many media outlets straight after a game. And you have to say something, and you're not often going to get managers who come in and go, I totally made a complete ricket of the substitutes. They're not going to, they'll own up to certain things, but they're, at that stage, he's probably still fuming about
them, though, hasn't he? He has before.
He has.
That game's on
a little bit.
I made the wrong call. Maybe he's just run out. He can't just keep going on and blaming himself. Perhaps
a little bit, but the pressure's ramping up every game. So having made a mess of the Bournemouth game, having lost yesterday, it's difficult to come out and go, "Yep, I messed up again." So I do have a certain sympathy with him in that regard, but. The fact of the matter is, we're in the Premier League. That's and everything has to be looked at through the Premier League lens. And that's players, manager. Are they good enough to play at this level? Are they good enough to manage at this level? You can make mistakes in the Championship and get away with it. We saw that plenty of games. I mean, I've referred to it before, the Joe Rothwell game against Huddersfield, where we were diabolical, and then we got away with it and we ended up winning the game. You can't do that in the Premier League. You can't make as many mistakes as we're making, and as we know, it's always the manager who carries the can. It's not the crap players, and we do have quite a few who are just not good enough for this Premier League level. I mean, that's the thing as well. If you look at the starting lineup, it's probably only Ryan Manning who you'd look at and say, is he really a Premier League player? I don't really think so. But by the end of the game, if you look at various times at the end of the game, we had Smallbone, Ryan Fraser, Tall Paul, and you've Sulemana. You're looking at those thinking that's 4 or 5 players there who are just not good enough really to play regularly in the Premier League and consistently be be any good. So there is an issue with the players, but this is what the manager has to work out. He has to work out which players can do the job. I mean, Ryan Manning, to be honest, even though he had some good moments yesterday, should not be playing in the Premier League. It just shouldn't. And the more players that we have who are substandard on the pitch, we're going to struggle with. Russell Martin is running out of road. That's you can't go. Well, I mean, let's face it, we're going to get beat next week. So that's 9 games without a win. It'll be, and then the game after that, is it Everton at home or was it Wolves at home? I can't remember.
Everton first.
Everton at home. That's going to be absolutely huge, isn't it?
Yeah, and they've started picking up a couple of wins, haven't they?
You said a couple of weeks ago, he can't lose against both Leicester and Everton and expect to survive. But the other side of that coin is that there's no real point in replacing him unless you can get someone in who's going to be better. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if some managers are being sounded out behind the scenes. I mean, if you look at someone like Graham Potter, if we're absolutely dead and we've only got 1 point and we're 10 points adrift or whatever, is he going to want to come in? Probably not. So they're going to have to talk to people if they want to go down that route of and work out if who actually wants to come in. Otherwise,
do you think the longer they leave it, the harder the task is, because people are going to look at it and go, I don't fancy that.
Yeah, I mean, if you take Graham Potter that's exactly what I mean. If you take Graham Potter as an example, he wants to get his managerial career back on track. So he won't want a nailed on relegation that he can do nothing about, because that'll stick to him. Obviously, if he can pull it off and keep us up, then great. But he's got to be able, from his point of view, he's got to be able to look at the club and the squad of players and think, can I achieve with this? I don't believe in replacing managers unless you can get better as a result of doing it. We saw where it led last time when we basically just, we chucked Ralph Hasenhüttl out and got Nathan Jones, and then we chucked him out and got Ruben Sellers and managed to get worse every time. So there's no point in doing it for the sake of it. But I think I'm probably the same as a lot of people. I want Russell Martin to do well. I'd love him to do well, in the same way that I wanted Nigel Adkins to do well when we came up last time, because he's just the sort of character that you want to do well. But you can't, and he knows this, you can't carry on losing games, especially in the manner that we lost that one yesterday, and expect to keep your job indefinitely. It's just a fact.
George, our emotions are always quite high after a last-minute goal like that. We're always looking for someone to blame. I know you've written about this today. What's the balanced view? I've seen people talking about Nathan Jones. He had 8 games as manager in the Premier League. At least he managed to win, which is more than Russell Martin has. But I think, as you pointed out today, you're not really comparing eggs with eggs there, are you? The context is very different. So what's the balanced view on this? Just give us some of the facts, if you would.
Well, if you just look at that Nathan Jones one, for example, I think they had 15 games left in that season. There's much more games left now. At that point, they needed to make a decision, and Nathan Jones had 0 credit in the bank. I think Russell Martin spent a lot of his credit on the Bournemouth game, on the Ipswich game, and especially on the game yesterday. So he's probably running out. And I wrote in the piece, he needs a top up and he needs it quick. And you're not going to get that at Manchester City, but it's those 2 games afterwards that he's probably hoping the board will give him. But I think there's another side of it as well, because you could look at those 2 games, which are just before an international break, and you've also got the one against Stoke, where owners could think, if we bring someone in, you've given them 3 games, which are winnable games to get you started, then you've got an international break. So perhaps that may come into thinking when you're making a decision. Not saying that I've seen or heard anything that they're going to move him on at this point, but I think if you're sacking a manager, like Glen's alluded to there, sacking a manager should be done because you're bringing somebody else in, right? You're sacking someone because you think you can go and find someone better. And if they do wait for too long, there's other teams in the Premier League who may also make a decision on their managers. There's some teams who are struggling at the moment. And if you get yourself into a race against those teams, Wolves, West Ham, you're making it even more difficult, because if you're competing for the same type of manager, the same level of manager, they're probably going to want to go to Wolves or West Ham because they have better players in their squad. West Ham won a European competition not too long ago, and Southampton aren't in a position where some other Premier League teams are in, where they can bully teams below them. The only teams below Southampton at the minute pretty much are championship teams, and that's where they went and got Russell Martin from. That's where they went and got Nathan Jones from. So they don't really have the luxury of going anywhere they want to go and find a manager like we've seen with other teams doing. So I think it's one where they have to find someone. If they're going to ever move him on, they have to find someone first. You can't sack a manager and then be scrambling around looking. Look at what someone like Ireland did on an international level. They went 8 months without a manager. You're never going to see that at club level, of course, but that was a decision that was made too early, and they've not gone and set someone up to replace. So for me, I think, like it's been alluded to, you have to sort of do that pre-work to find someone if you're going to make that decision. But at the same time, you have to get them. You do have to make sure you also don't sack someone too late. And I don't think we're quite reaching that point. But 1 point after 8 games is a position that not many people would survive.
We're going to get onto the Man City game in a minute, Steve, but we're looking at heading into November with just 1 point, presumably. So for you, is it about those games that are coming up, the ones we talked about, the Everton, the Stoke, the Wolves? Those are key, aren't they, really? Yeah,
they're massive. But at the same time, there's such pressure on them that if all three of them, if you include the Stoke Cup game, because even if you send out a second string side, if you lose that game, then everyone's annoyed because you've thrown away the opportunity of a cup run. But yeah, if you come up to this November international break and we've still only got 1 point, then there's no confidence in any department that you're then going to have any chance of getting out of trouble at that point, because you're then 11 games in. That's that's just shy of a third of the season, and you've only got 1 point. You're then looking at needing to get you're then looking at needing to get probably 30-35 points in 20 games, which would be top 6 form. With the best will in the world, that's just not a realistic ask for anybody, I don't think. So yeah, it does make the sort of psychology of it and the dynamics very difficult to manage from both a board and a first team managerial perspective, because at the end of the day, if we're dead and buried by November, then you're not going to be able to sign anybody who's got the right attitude in January, and anybody who's any good here is going to be angling for a move away and getting out of here at the first opportunity. So yeah, it's one of those situations that could unravel very, very quickly and could be quite unpleasant, I think. Kind of probably on a par with the sort of back end of the Nathan Jones era, especially if you've got, because while I think there is a sense sort of within the Saints fan base that kind of Russell Martin he's our guy. He speaks well in press conferences and all this sort of stuff. Actually, if you speak to fans of other clubs, they think he's an absolute gobshite, and everybody is loving him getting taken down a peg or two. So I do wonder when that switch kind of flicks as well a little bit in terms of the fan opinion, that actually I'm not. You tend to kind of analyze comments in interviews and press conferences and stuff a little bit differently when the opinion of the person making those comments changes a little bit. So yeah, it's next 3 weeks are huge. Get Saturday out of the way, and the 3 that follow before the international break really are make or break, I think.
George, were you covering Bournemouth last year, or did I make that up?
No. I was
just trying to think, because did they lose their first 10? Well, they didn't win for 10 games. I was just trying to
didn't win for 9, I think. Yeah,
clutch it. It was the 10th one, wasn't it? And it all came good for them. I'm just trying to try and finish on a positive, but they're a bit sort of few and far between. I guess, Glenn, it looks like there are 4 teams that are starting to get cut off a bit already. For us, I think it's about finishing above Wolves, Palace and Ipswich right now, isn't it? Everton are kind of strung a couple of wins together and they're putting away. And I've not really looked at the table, but you can't help it this weekend and go, actually, Everton are on, is it 8 points already?
Yep.
Yeah. I think I've said this before. I don't tend to look at league tables if we can't sort our own form out. League tables look after themselves if you start winning games. But yeah, at the moment, there are still 4 teams that haven't won, I mean, Ipswich will go down. I'm 100% convinced Ipswich will go down. Wolves should be good enough with good enough players to make a decent fist of it. I mean, they need to change their manager. I'm amazed they haven't done it already. And Crystal Palace have amazed me how bad they've been, because they were so good at the tail end of last season, and I actually felt a bit sorry for them, because they reminded me of us in sort of like 2016 when we were decent, in that they had a decent 3/4 of a season when Glasner came in, and then all of a sudden all the big boys said, "Oh no, you've got nice things. You're not allowed to have that. We're gonna sign him, and we're gonna sign him." And they kind of missed their window. If they'd have got rid of Hodgson earlier and had Glasner for the whole of last season, they would have been pushing for a European place. But I mean, what players did they lose? They lost Anderson, and they lost
Anderson and Elise.
So they only really lost 2 big players.
And Ayew to Leicester, of course.
Yeah, but it seems to have had a catastrophic effect on what they were doing. So, but I would still, Palace they seem to flirt with relegation at various times of the season, but they seem to get out of it. I mean, as time goes on, there will be other teams dragged into it. I mean, I think Leicester will get dragged into it again. And there will be some others in the bottom half who will end up looking over their shoulders. But yeah, at the moment, it's that game of trying to find 3 teams that are worse than you. And at the moment, there aren't any, to be quite honest, unless you look down in the Championship. So, but no, and until we can start winning home games. I mean, the other thing is that we've played the 2 promoted sides at home and haven't beaten either of them. So then you're looking at the next sort of set of teams that you want to get points against. Suddenly, home games against the likes of, I don't know, Brentford or Brighton become huge must-win games, and it's more difficult to beat Brighton at home. Yeah, and it's more difficult to beat teams that are finishing around mid-table than it is to beat Ipswich at home. Yeah. So we've if you want to be optimistic about it, we've just got to hope that once we get over the line in a game, that the team realise what it takes to get over the line, how much sacrifice you have to put in. Russell Martin realises what players he can pick, what players he just shouldn't, and we don't make any more mistakes. But there are lots of things that we need to get right in order to get over the line in a game. The basic resilience is how we respond to setbacks. What substitutions to make. Taking our chances when we get them. There's so many things that need to fall into place that are just not there at the moment. And it's going to be a long old season, isn't it?
Is there anything else on Leicester before we do TSP Player of the Week?
I've just thought that near own goal was absolutely incredible.
By the way. Right.
I mean, seriously, he could not have headed that any harder.
That was up your end, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, this is the thing, right? We've got this new, obviously, northern wall, and the atmosphere has actually been pretty good for the most part. We've still not scored a goal at that end. And yeah, it's mad. And the closest we've come is probably that header. I mean, literally like a foot either side, and the keeper ain't saving it because it's coming so fast. But yeah, I mean, that would have put us 3-0 up and game over. I think. I mean, even the way we sat back and let Fatawu run at us in the last 25 minutes, I don't think they'd have been able to provoke that sort of recovery from 3-0 particularly when the third one has gone in that fashion. So yeah, that was annoying that it was a brilliant save by the keeper.
Could have been good. Were you going to add something else, Glenn?
No, I just thought of one more thing about Anthony Taylor, and it's possibly an innocuous one, but I've never seen this before. Do you remember 3 minutes after our time, he booked Sugawara for taking too long over a throw-in?
Yeah.
That never happens. Not in the 49th, not in the 48th, 49th minute. How many times last season, for example, did we see teams wasting time from the 30th minute onwards and get an early booking like that? So, yeah.
No, it was literally only the first 2 or 3 games of the season, wasn't it, when they had that clamp down, when we were getting 10, 11 minutes of injury time in both halves. And then they kind of rode back on it after about 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, but I thought that one was absolutely ridiculous yesterday because he hadn't even taken that long at that point.
No.
So yeah, Anthony Taylor, beast.
Brilliant. Let's do player of the week then, George. Bizarrely, despite the outcome, I can think of a couple of people that actually did all right yesterday. Is there a standout? I don't know if you did the ratings in the Echo. Is there someone that really stood out for you yesterday? It was Fernandez who won player of the week last week, by the way, and it could be another shout for this week too.
Yeah, I thought Cameron Archer looked good, 2-2 for him now. I think he's not going to take every single chance. Very few strikers in the world do that, but he's someone who gets way more chances than any other striker Southampton have got, and that has to be a result of his movement. And I think the pace he offers adds so much more. When you compare him to other options they've got, I feel like for £15 million, he's starting to look like a decent get when you consider what you can actually buy for that and the other players they've signed for similar fees to that and lesser fees, and he looks like more than twice the player of some of those players. So I think he looked quite good, and hopefully 2 goals in 2 is the start of a really good season for him.
Good shout. Yeah, I was going to say Kyle Walker-Peters, Steve. I thought he had one of his best games at left back, and then it all kind of went a bit pear-shaped when he got shifted. Anyone else you want to add on the list?
I actually thought Manning was good when he was playing in that midfield role. Excellent first half, I thought. Obviously got the assist for the opener and gave Walker-Peters plenty of support when on the rare occasions that Leicester tried to attack us down that side. Because it was a very clear tactic that Leicester had in the first 15-20 minutes was to pump the ball long over the fullbacks and hope there was enough space for them to run into. And I thought we dealt with that threat quite well. And yeah, I mean, switching him to left back, as Glenn says, he's nowhere near a Premier League level left back. But in the system that we were trying to play in the first half, from the start of the game, as we saw at Arsenal as well, in a obviously very different circumstance, but even in a game where we were expecting to have a sizable amount of the ball, I thought he did pretty well, really. Just let's not play him at left back again, or at least give him a little bit of defensive help in front of him.
Glenn, anyone else to add to the list?
Joe Aribo.
Yeah, I'm glad you said Aribo.
Yeah, I thought he was excellent, and part of the reason for the cave-in was that to accommodate the training cone who came on as a sub, we moved him to the left-hand side of midfield, and that basically taking him out of the middle. I thought he's added something to his game the last couple of weeks. Again, he's improved again. Just the solidity that he offers in the centre of the pitch. We thought Leslie Ugachukwu would be that guy, but Aribo has said, "Well, no, I can do that," and he's done that. And obviously, he popped up with a goal. Yeah, I thought he was excellent for the first hour, but with the reshuffle, moving him out of the middle to accommodate Smallbone, I thought was ridiculous, and that's another thing that added to the problems that we had. But yeah, there you go. So I thought Joe Aribo was excellent again.
Good to see him on the score sheet too. So we'll get that poll onto social media very soon. Now, we don't print out any posters for TSP to promote the podcast and litter them around Southampton, but what we do allow is excellent reviews to sit proudly on the Apple podcast page, showcasing the brilliant work that the guys do week in, week out. Somebody asked me yesterday, it must be quite tough talking about the football every Sunday night. Yes, it is. At the moment, it is. So we did say last week we do some shout outs for anyone who left us a review on Apple Podcasts. So thank you to those that they did. Hello to Salisbury Guy, who says, I look forward to this podcast every week, more so when Saints win. It's been a while. That was a review this week, by the way. The boys do a great job in analysing the previous game and previewing the next, both informative and entertaining. So we'll take that. Rachel said, great podcast for Saints fans. And somebody called Creamy Bun Man, not judging, says it's amazing. It's a perfect Saints podcast for you. I would give it a 10, but that's not possible. So the offer does still stand. If you head over to Apple Podcasts, if you've not already done so, you can leave us a rating and a review on there, and I will read them out next week. Right, let's get on to the Man City preview then. When you're searching for your first win of the season, what's better than the trip to Man City? I mean, you could say it goes from bad to worse for Saints, really. George, if I start with you, I'm going to look at the positives again. Wolves almost picked up a point. Man City needing I think it was a 95th minute winner, wasn't it? Does that give us a bit of hope? Is there any hope travelling to Manchester City?
I think if they can replicate a lot of the stuff they did in the first hour against Arsenal, where they became quite difficult to score against, although Arsenal then went and scored 3 goals. If they can do that again, then they'll give themselves at least a chance to do something at Man City. But there's not many clubs in world football who go to Manchester City thinking they're going to get something, and it might be one where we were captaining Saka against Saints last time around. It might be triple captain time for Haaland this time around. But I think it's like you said, it's the worst team to come up against when you're itching and desperate for your first win of the season. But we've seen weirder things happen, and not suggesting I think they're going to win that game. But we've seen them beat Man City before when they were desperate for a win. So perhaps it'll happen again.
Well, I think I see today they haven't lost in 31 Premier League games. We haven't won in 21 Premier League games, so the omens aren't looking good, Steve. What are your expectations? Is it same as the Arsenal game? Just try and put in a good performance. You want to see a bit of solidity. Yeah. You don't want us to get a mauling.
Yeah, I think if you come out of it with minimal damage, maybe land a couple of blows ourselves as we did at Arsenal. We've obviously been banging this drum for time eternal, but if we combination of taking the chances that we did create and not gifting good players easy chances at the other end, then maybe we might have taken something from the Emirates. And you've got to look at that performance as basically the blueprint for Man City. It's going to be a very similar experience, I would imagine. City now play in a fairly similar fashion. They don't really like just putting the ball in the box, which is odd given they've got an absolute monster up front who can win stuff in the air and is perfectly good at heading crosses. But they're quite puritanical about it and still like to play the way they play. So actually, if we can stay quite narrow, very compact, don't allow them to play the little quick 1-2s and little triangles in and around our penalty area. And if they're restricted to shots at 25 yards, great. Okay, fine. They may end up flying in the top corner anyway because they are good. But yeah, you've never got no chance. But yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if the bookies are putting us any shorter than 15-1 to win that game. That's for sure.
Glenn, we've conceded 4 in each of the last 4 league games against them. Is there anything to suggest that won't happen again?
I think there is actually the stuff that Steve's just talked about. I remember one game we had up there where we ended up losing with Raheem Sterling scoring in the last minute, but that was kind of the blueprint of how to play against Manchester City. Even then, before they had Haaland, is that you've got to make them cross the ball. You've got, you can't let them sort of like pass through you. So you'll end up with 2 lines of 4 or a line of 4 and a line of 5, right in front of your penalty area for the lot of the game. But you have to try and do what we did against Arsenal and try and frustrate them. I mean, I always watch these games thinking 10 minutes at a time. Can we get to 10 minutes at 0-0? Can we get to done that? Can we get to 20 minutes at 0-0? And if you can survive the opening sort of 20, 25 minutes of the game, then sometimes they do doze off if it's been relatively easy for them. And City are not watertight. I mean, they've let in a few goals this season, more than they normally do. So I'm sure there will be chances we will see Ederson on the highlights package, perhaps. Whereas I didn't expect to see David. Yeah, I didn't expect to see David Raya at all, and we saw him in the end. I mean, City are much better than everybody. They're much better than Arsenal. They're much better than Liverpool. So it obviously is the most difficult game that we're going to have this year. But and of course they've got the centre forward who is frightening if you don't play him properly. I mean, he tends to play in the sort of, whenever I see him, he seems to be in the sort of left channel. So I think it will be Harwood-Bellis. I think Harwood-Bellis will
relish that though, won't it? That's why he wants to be those games.
Yeah. And if Haaland's got any sense, he'll. I mean, I think Harwood-Bellis will give him a tougher ride than say Bednarek will. But no, I fully expect us to go out with the same sort of formation that we had against Arsenal, which was basically 4-5-1, and Fernandes will be in midfield trying to get up and help Archer out. But be interesting to see if we. I mean, they've got Haaland, we've got Tall Paul, of course. It'll be interesting to see if we try and if we try and use him. It'd be interesting to see what his role is in that, because to have some sort of element of surprise. And they're not, the central defenders that they've got are not going to be used to playing against someone who's 6'8" and just massive. So, but obviously we've got to use him in the right way, like we tried to yesterday. Get balls up to him, and I mean, I don't think he'll start, but hopefully we can stay in the game long enough so he can have some sort of impact at the end of the game. But there's no question it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be watching through your fingers whether you're in the ground or sat at home. It's just one of those that, yeah, as Steve said, you got to get through it with minimal damage with any luck. But yeah, it's ridiculous really that we're even playing them, to be honest. When you look at when you look at the levels of spending and the players they've got, it's just nuts really that we're in the same division as them. But here we are, and got to give it a go.
The team news is going to be an interesting one, George. I guess we'll have to wait and see what the outcome are of the injuries. We know that obviously Sugawara went off injured, Will Smallbone. Be interesting to see if he's back in the squad or not. And then you've got obviously Fraser's going to be suspended, so there might be a few changes for this one.
Yeah, you got Jack Stevens coming back from suspension as well, and he played in the 21s on Friday. So perhaps if Sugawara is maybe one to miss out, you shuffle Walker Peters across back to the right, bring Stevens in on that left-hand side like we've known Russell Martin likes to do. I think it's going to be one of those where perhaps, again, that's a game where Lallana, you probably want Lallana in that one, don't you? If you want someone to give a bit of leadership, if you don't want Jack Stevens, like I think the other two boys definitely don't want him in the side by the looks of it.
What gave it away?
I think it was the face palms. But yeah, I think it'd be interesting one. I think that it's another game where perhaps you look at Diblin, right? Is he going to be protected from that game? Do you want someone who's maybe going to, not saying that Diblin doesn't defend, but do you want someone who's perhaps a bit more experienced, but then you take away Diblin and you lose that opportunity to beat someone? And like we've already alluded to, Man City aren't as good as they've been defensively. So Russell's got a couple of choices to make, but you sort of feel like at the minute, you don't really know what his team's going to be, because last season it felt like there come a point in the season where we knew what the team was going to be. Now, you know a lot of the players that are going to be in there, but you're also not surprised if there's 4 names in the team that you maybe weren't expecting.
I think we're saying, Steve, it's a free hit, this one, isn't it? He's not going to lose his job after this.
I mean, unless it's something silly,
which we can't rule out.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not that we've not seen this story before, is it? But no, I mean, as long as we don't get completely disgraced, then no, this shouldn't be a catalyst for anything in that sense.
All right, let's do some score predictions. Just one person in the TSP Patreons Prediction League got 3 points this week. So I must do a shout out to Andrew Jordan. There are still 33 people in the league without a single point. So it turns out it's actually harder than it looks, doesn't it? All those that mocked us.
Am I one of them?
I can neither confirm or deny.
I've predicted us to win at least 4 games. So yeah, it's definitely me.
Do you want to go first with your prediction, Glenn, then?
Yeah, 4-1 Manchester City.
4-1 Man City. Steve?
I'll stick with our record of shipping 3 goals every game, so 3-1.
Okay. And George?
Yeah, 3 is a magic number for opposition teams, and it's 6 times this season if you count the Cardiff game. I was going to say 3-1 as well.
Okay. If you're watching live, don't forget, stick your predictions in the comments, because I'd love to hear those. Better news, though, for the women's team. I mean, they thrashed Pompey 5-0, I think it was, in the end. Not such a great result today. George, you were at the game today against Birmingham, and it was a tough one, wasn't it?
Yeah, Birmingham top of the table, much more difficult test than Portsmouth. It feels like teams are 3-0 up when they kick off against Portsmouth with some of the scores they've lost by this season. Birmingham set up and were exactly what Saints expected them to be, and Remy Allen was quite disappointed that Saints didn't reach the level. They've lost 2 games this season, 6 points off the top, and you only have 1 promotion spot in the championship. So if you do lose games, it's quite difficult to win points back against other teams. But they played 1 game less than Birmingham, so you could argue that perhaps if they win that extra game, because there's only 11 teams in the league this season with Reading pulling out, that you could be 3 points off it. But it's a really difficult league. If you start losing games early on in the season, although it's becoming more competitive and teams are losing more because a lot of the teams are kind of on a similar level, it feels like it's quite difficult to get out of that league. And especially when you take away another team, that's almost 6 points that aren't available to be picked up. So it's going to be even more tight. I think they're down to 7th at the minute, but you're 7th and there's 6 points away from the top of the table. Shows how tight it is after, I think, only 6, 7, 8 games. So it'd be interesting to see how they sort of pick up. International break now. They got, I think, 5 or so players going away, so chance for them to work on a few things. And they got Charlton up next, who are going quite well considering their men's team are in League One, and it feels like a lot of the teams who are doing well in the Women's Championship this season who've got investment are not teams tied to Premier League clubs. You look at the money London City have spent, only really sort of someone like Newcastle you'd expect to back a team in the same way. So Women's Championship is quite an interesting league, especially it's a weird league to only have 11 teams in it.
Yeah. Glenn, you enjoyed the Pompey game, didn't you? It was
Pompey
fun.
game was good. Yeah, the Pompey game was fun, but as George alluded to there, Pompey were terrible. Really, really, really bad. And to be honest, Saints didn't play that well for the first probably 75 minutes. They were 2-0 up. One was an own goal and a ball over the top that Pompey just didn't deal with. And it was 3 goals from, I think it was sort of 89, 92 and 94 or something like that, which probably gave the scoreline we deserved, but it should have been much more comfortable because, I mean, Pompey had a chance at 2-0 that could have made it 2-1, and then it's a totally different end to the game, isn't it? But they from what I saw of the game, they controlled the game pretty well. They always looked to pass forward, which I thought was good, but they made a lot of sort of like wrong decisions in the final third, and they didn't sort of like take as or create as many chances, I think was the main problem. There was a lot of sort of like someone attempts to play the final ball through and it didn't quite work. So, but as Steve has said earlier, when we talked about the women's team, they lost a lot of sort of attacking players and they haven't really replaced them. So there's that's a bit of an issue. And to be honest, from what I've seen and with the result today, I would be surprised if they are challenging for that, for that top spot at the end of the season.
There was a lot of change in the summer, Steve. New manager as well coming in, but this isn't really the start they would have wanted. They're not kind of where they want to be.
It's not ideal. And also, if you look at, I mean, I do wonder, like the preparation at the start of the season just felt a little bit haphazard. There was a lot of, I mean, you never really quite knew what was going on with basically all the preseason friendlies were behind closed doors for reasons unknown. Nobody could get a look at what, how the new manager was trying to set things up, what was going to be different compared to last season under Marianne Spacey Kale. And yeah, you go into the season, and actually that opening game of the season where they drew 1-1 at home to Bristol City and were probably fortunate to get that point. And actually, you look at how all the other results have gone, and actually Bristol City are going to be one of the weaker sides in this division. I mean, there's no obviously on any one day any team can win any given game, but and we've dropped points at home to Blackburn, who have barely beaten anybody else either. So it's finishing off those games against the weaker teams. We've actually played all right in the games against the better sides. Like we go up to Sunderland and win 3-0. I mean, Sunderland have been fairly free scoring. So yeah, it's looking like another one of those frustrating seasons where if we had, I mean, you look at what Crystal Palace had last season. They had, I think their top scorer got 20 something, and their second top scorer had 15. And killing games off against the weaker sides with, you've got players like that who are basically you get a game against a team in the bottom 2 or 3, and those 2 players are going to guaranteed to get 3 goals between them every game. You just give them enough chances, they will take them. Whereas we don't quite have that clinical edge to us yet. We've got good players who on their day can score goals and can score plenty of them. I mean, you look at, as I say, the quality of the goals that we scored away at Sunderland. I mean, I guess the 3 late ones against Pompey were all a little bit sort of breakaway, but you've still got to finish those chances, and they did so. But yeah, I think while we do seem to be scoring more goals so far, we don't seem to be quite looking like we're going to be clinical enough to challenge properly. I think probably similar finish to last season, I would imagine, which, I mean, given the sort of upheaval in the summer, might not be seen as necessarily a bad ending. But yeah, I mean, there's you only ever there's always an opportunity to win this division. There's nobody who, I mean, as George said, London City Lioness has got a big budget, but they've not looked particularly great to start with. They're looking a little bit like they're still getting their feet under the table. So yeah, the title is there for somebody, but it's one of those, you've probably got to make a pretty fast start, and we haven't quite done it, I don't think.
Anything else on the women's team?
I think talk about sort of not having too much attacking quality. If you do think they have players who can become goal scorers, Rihanna Dean is someone who has done it in the Championship. It's more about keeping her fit. She's got 5 already. When she was at Spurs in the Championship, helped them get up. I think she scored pretty much as many goals as she played games. I think they brought Freya Gregory in, someone who played with Remy Allen previously at Aston Villa, hoping that she would be someone who gets goals. She's got one already and sort of created that own goal against Portsmouth. Rachel Rose, someone who can score goals. She hasn't got one yet. Molly Pike can score goals, but like Steve's alluded to there, it's getting those players consistently in positions to score goals. Particularly in home games, it feels like whenever they go somewhere, they go and score 5 at Pompey, score 3 at Sunderland. They're scoring goals away from home. It's then when you come and see them at St Mary's, you're almost thinking sometimes, when's the goal going to come? You don't think it's going to come. And today was another one of those games where every time they sort of got into the final third, you thought it's not going to come. You can almost see it before that final ball finds no one.
Was there an issue with Remy Allen seemed to be appointed very late in the piece. There was a huge gap between the announcement of Marianne Spacey-Cole basically going upstairs and Remy Allen coming in. And during that huge gap, you had players leaving, and there didn't seem to be any sort of plan in place from the outside. You know, there was obviously Marianne was still there, but you know, a new manager you would think would want to be involved earlier in the piece to try and bring in the players that they want to bring in. They just seem to be, you know, just a big gap to me that in an ideal world wouldn't have happened. I mean, I don't know what the situation was with regards to Remy Allen and a previous club, whether she had to wait a certain amount of time before she could take another job or anything like that. But that to me doesn't seem to have helped the start of the season.
Yeah, I think they try to have a thorough process, which you maybe don't particularly see sort of in women's football. Usually it does perhaps feel like manager decisions are made a little bit quicker. You don't really tend to also see managers getting called for them to be sacked. I think maybe it comes down to how late Marianne Spacey-Cole made that decision to step away. Did she make that decision and then they announced it really soon after? I don't know the answer, to be fair. I asked Marianne, was it a decision based on the fact they didn't go up, and then that then makes it an opportunity to sort of change things around? Remy Allen did leave London City a little while before they announced bringing her in, and they've got people like recruitment staff in place now. Marianne's involved in recruitment in terms of players as well, so I think they already cracked on with signing players. And then you look at the players who left at the end of their contracts or retired. You look at something like Ella Morris, you can't really blame her for going to the WSL. Laura Rafferty going up to Scotland, where you're having a much easier time of it. Same with Katie Wilkinson. It's more the Sophia Farrows and those sorts of players. Lexi Lloyd-Smith, who've landed. Sophia Farrow's not gone anywhere, I don't think. Lexi Lloyd-Smith's in the Championship. You hold on to those players, right? If you want to build something, keep as many players as you can. And perhaps that's maybe where they've gone wrong. Too much of a change.
Well, don't forget you can follow Total Saints Podcast on all the social media platforms. If you don't already, then do go check it out. It's just at Total Saints Pod. You'll find us on all of those. Check out the merch shop as well. There's some really cool bits on there. Some really decent artwork, some really exclusive artwork as well. It's shop.totalsaints.co.uk. We're also on Patreon. I mentioned it right at the start. That's where you can support the podcast with a monthly contribution. Just visit patreon.com/Total Saints Podcast. Each of the tiers on there. Comes with some different perks, including weekly shout outs for patrons in our Francis Benali and our Mick Shannon tiers. So thank you to Dave Melton, Andy Hollis, Anthony Thompson, Gavin Ford, James Harron, Nicky Nicholson, Southampton NY, Drew Dyer, and James Kibbe, who are in the Francis Benali tier. Also, thank you to Colt Baker, Dave Ernsberger, Ed Busy, Nick Higston, Phil Cook, Nick Reed, Paul Stewart, Phil Horstrup, Matt Hall, Mark Littlewood, Mike Etheridge, James Bobin, and John Bevan, who are all in our Mick Shannon tier. Thanks as well to Paul Castle Associates and Steamtown Brewery for sponsoring TSP this season. Thank you to Steve, Glenn, and George for joining us this week. To play us out, we've got a video that James Wills sent us on X of a busker that he spotted in Winchester. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And we'll see you again next time.
When the saints are